Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we review the Warhammer 40k novel, Catachan Devil, by Justin Woolley. As always with our reviews, I'll do a spoiler-free review, followed by a little spoiler talk at the end. A few particular talking points I want to discuss for those that have already read it. And I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. As always, let's begin by checking out the synopsis off the back of the book. When Colonel Haskell Hellfest Alderlon and the Catachan 57th Jungle Fighters arrive on the quagmire world of Gondwa 6, they find it locked in the grip of an ever-growing greenskin threat. Rather than shoring up the meagre defences, they instead elect to go on the offensive and retake the strategically vital Outpost 4, but are saddled with the barely trained Trooper Torvin of the Skady 2nd Infantry, sole survivor of its fall. As the Astra Militarum and Orcs clash, and Colonel Alderlon comes to terms with the cost of victory, Torvin finds himself as much at risk from the jungle fighters, who suspect him of cowardice, as he is from the vile Xenos, unless he can pass through this trial by fire and earn the respect of the Catachan Devils. Well, I don't think any of you will be too shocked to hear as far as factions go in the 40k universe, I'm a bit of a Space Marine lover. I know, it surprised me too. But despite that, the Imperial Guard have always held a bit of a childhood sweet spot for me. As an 80s baby, I was raised on old school action movies. You know, the kind of ones we probably shouldn't have been watching as a kid. Predator, Rambo, Commando. Just pure old school action awesomeness. And of course, in loving that, once you laid eyes on that old school 2nd edition Imperial Guard Codex, you just had to love the Catachans. In fact, I had all of those old school metal regiments. The Catachans, the Cadians, Talans, Mordians, I love them all. However, when it comes to the novels, well, not so much. I've always struggled to get into Astra Militarum stories. They've never really gripped me, coming across as pretty much your standard soldier battle. So my hopes weren't that high going into Catachan Devil. I thought I'd get a few chapters in and then find my attention beginning to wander. But I will happily say, boy, that was not the case here. I absolutely loved this one from beginning to end. Now, as the synopsis suggests, this story is largely told from the perspective of the Catachan Colonel Haskell and the rather inept Trooper Torvin. And I have to say, this dynamic really worked. Essentially, it's an Imperial world defending against a small-scale Orc invasion. And as you might expect, the Catachans are brought in as reinforcements. Starting with Torvin, here you see what is basically your standard Militarum soldier. We're not talking from a galaxy-renowned world such as Catachan or Cadia. We're talking one of the billion nameless worlds that actually make up the Imperial Guard. The men and women who may or may not even have a choice. And Torvin's one of those who never even signed up for this, who was recruited to play his part, whether he liked it or not. And I'm not going to go into real spoilers here, but I think what the author does really well is that Torvin manages to feel relatable without falling too far into the stereotype character, the reluctant soldier out of his depth. You see and understand how Torvin feels. And yeah, he's surrounded by your cut and paste army soldier characters, yet there's that fine balance, that naivety in Torvin that keeps it being too predictable. And at some point in his journey, you find yourself wanting Torvin to survive. that somewhere along his journey you've found yourself going from observer, simply watching Torvin's struggles, to becoming fully invested. And I have to say, the further this story goes, the better and better it gets. Now, when the Catachans enter the story, you feel immediately the story step up a notch. And that's not a negative of the story, because it should feel that way. The Catachans are a breed apart from your standard guardsmen, and this story portrays that well. Admittedly, at the start you feel like it's all going to play out exactly how you expect. However, you'll be pleasantly surprised. There's a surprising amount of depth that gradually unravels from the prototypical jungle warriors. Colonel Haskell in particular. He manages to maintain that hard edge, badass Catachan commander vibe, yet still give those glimpses of vulnerability beneath, which for a Catachan you may think comes at the expense of his character, but it doesn't. If anything, it further emphasizes why the Catachans are such awesome characters, and adds a surprising amount of humanity to him and his squad, shining a light onto this legendary unit. You get great little pieces of insight throughout the story of how not only the rest of the Militarum views the Catachans, but also how they in turn view the rest of the Militarum. The differences in views on your standard trooper such as Torvin, compared to the likes of other well-regarded regiments, such as the Cadians or Krieg for example. And these are the kind of things you want to see from an Imperial Guard novel. Something that makes you feel like you're reading something you never have before. When it comes to Catachans, you of course can't help but think of the movie Predator. And yeah, you most definitely get those vibes here, when these guys are trekking through the rain-infested jungle. But again, rather than a negative, that's the feeling you want from a Catachan story. These guys are supposed to feel that way. It works. It absolutely works. If one of them was carrying a minigun and uttered he ain't got time to bleed, well, I would be all for it. Now, in order for a story to take the step from okay to great, you need to have that villain, that worthy adversary. And here it's taken place by the Orcs, in particular one named Nogrog Sneaky Guts. Again, with the Greenskins, it's that careful balancing game, having that humour of the race weighing against the danger they represent. Nogrog's story is a little different in that he isn't presented immediately as the big bad threat of the Orcs, and you actually get to witness his story within the Orc War. Now, most likely because of this, I'm not quite sure he ever reached the truly menacing level. But that said, I never once felt annoyed or disappointed when it diverted to his point of view. These moments always added to the story, and you get a nice bit of growth within the main Orc characters, establishing a bit of a background and depth in their own right. Most importantly, they never once overstayed their welcome. This story remains focused on Torvin and Haskell, and that is the key to the story's success. When you boil it all down, it allows you to follow and bond with the characters that matter. So many other stories try to do too much, adding character after character to ramp up the sense of drama and action. However, for me personally, this too often comes at the expense of allowing you to bond with the characters that matter. Here, Catachan Devil does not make that mistake, and I quite simply found myself loving the journey. At times you get emotional drama, but never anything that's too over the top. It's always immersed in the Predator-esque action awesomeness, all of which is wrapped up into a great Imperial Guard story. For me, this was a great read, and really upped my wish for some new updated Catachan troop models. By far and away one of my favourite Astra Militarum reads to date. Admittedly, I am a Catachan fan, but I think the author Justin Woolley has done a great job in bringing the essence of these characters to life, showcasing the dynamic that can exist between regiments without falling into the OTT stereotypical caricatures. As for its score, overall I quite happily give Catachan Devil a 4 out of 5. A thoroughly enjoyable read from beginning to end. There were moments I really didn't want to put this book down, and I would love to see further adventures of all the characters introduced. Now that's it for the spoiler-free review, moving on to a few quick talking point moments for those of us who have already read the story. Now, one of the aspects I really felt did this story a huge favour in the beginning was the excerpts of communication and standard militarum training that Torvin received. Just those small things, such as how positive his initial call-up message was. Congratulations, you're joining the Imperial Guard, which we all know is actually a death sentence. Just how oblivious to it this giant administrative machine is. I really felt it balanced that sense of humour and drama well. And along those same lines, how completely inaccurate his training description of the Orcs was. How a single guardsman could easily overpower the Xenos. It was really entertaining, yet also quite eye-opening on how blatantly lied to the troopers of the Militarum actually are. Us, as the readers and players, are so used to the fabled regiments of renown, but the actuality of it is most of the Guard is actually made up of regiments such as Torvin's, and witnessing the reality of their induction was actually hilarious and poignant at the same time. I really thought the author portrayed it all well, even in adding simple things like the guardsmen being able to write a short message to their loved ones before battle. How it'll take between 2 and, what was it, like 75 weeks to arrive? It may be even have been more than that, I'd have to go back and check. But I just had to stop and think about how long a timescale that was. How long they actually could have been dead before his family even received the message. And of course they'd most likely never even find out his actual fate. I definitely want to discuss this more in depth soon, but I thought this introduction really laid the foundation well. I was also quite surprised by the family dynamic within the Catachan unit, with Colonel Haskell not only having his daughter within his command, but also then the added fact of him coming to terms with his son's death on the campaign before. It was pretty interesting watching Haskell manage that Catachan legacy with the realities of human emotion, something you don't really expect to see in a Catachan story. As much as he didn't want to acknowledge it, it of course was still there, eating away inside him. And I found that sub-story was carried along quite nicely. Yes, it was a bit convenient to have Nogrok be the Orc who actually slew his son, but hey, come on, it was always going to be the case. And it did set up a rivalry going forward, which, like I said in the spoiler-free discussion, I'd quite happily see a sequel. Now, the last thing I just wanted to mention was Torvin's incorporation into the Catachan unit. Considering the time constraints of the story, of course it all transpired fairly quickly. But again, in a testament to the writing, when Torvin was handed that red bandana, I was actually smiling as I read it, so it was obviously well done. I was genuinely happy for the guy. In a few short pages, we'd seen this guy evolve from someone who completely didn't belong, who couldn't and wouldn't fight, to someone becoming accepted into perhaps the best Militarum regiment out there. And that was a part of the story I really enjoyed. Again, I don't want to harp on this too much here, as I'd definitely love to discuss this some more in depth at a later date. Which, yeah, we most likely will. But for me, this one had a lot going for it. And it was surprisingly deeper in parts than I expected going in. But as always everyone, what did you think? Did you enjoy your read through of Catachan Devil? Or do you prefer other Astra Militarum stories out there? Are you like me and struggle to get into them sometimes? Or do you actually prefer them to the Space Marine stories we so often receive? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. With that said, I am off and I'll see you all again real soon.